You are about to enjoy a Firearms Radio Network podcast. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you happen to listen to your podcasts at. Tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearms-related.tv. And then, like the last few episodes, tonight's episode is also brought to you by RangeBuddy. RangeBuddy is it's an app that it's a catalog of shooting drills sorted by the different target types. So if you go out to the range with a B8 or a USPSA target or steel targets, you click on the target type, it will give you a list of different drills that you can run. Click on the drill that you would like to run. It'll tell you how to run that drill, the number of rounds required, all that good stuff. There's an integrated leaderboard that's specific to each one of those drills, so you can see how well or poorly you shoot compared to your buddies and some other folks that are on the app. A couple other things. I think that's about it for the RangeBuddy app. You can download it on iOS and Google. It's on the App Store, it's RangeBuddy Pro. And then on the Google Play Store, it's simply RangeBuddy. So check that out at RangeBuddy.App. And thanks again for tuning in tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking to John Valentine and his student Craig about the Defensive Combatives course offered by John through his training company, Deeds of Arms. John, before we get into the episode and talking specifically about the class, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the combatives training world.
Yeah, sure. So my name is John Valentine, originally from New York. Been married 17 years and have 3 kids, one on the way. I always I really got involved with training seriously because of my family. So that's why it's kind of a relevant thing. I remember my wife's the type of person where she likes to just pop up and just kind of be supportive. And one of these days, she walks in just as a guy was taking my back and strangling me. And it was like the last round of the last roll. So it was like kind of had to live with that and really think about it. So it really encouraged me to get serious about training. Later on, I got certified in Army combatives, and because of the seriousness of nature, I was deployed in Iraq at the time. So it was very real to me that the people that I was training may use this stuff. So I had to really take that responsibility to become as capable of a practitioner if I wanted to be a capable instructor. Fast forward a few years, end up getting serious, and I fought MMA, fought in boxing, competed internationally in jiu-jitsu, uh, won a couple medals, and I end up working for Matt Larson later on, a few years later, teaching combatives to some of the units in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Uh, then I worked in a couple other private organizations, ended up working with Green Ops, Sheepdog Response, Starting Strength. And I've been very, very, very fortunate. Went through the whole Range Master Instructor Development Program. I graduated Top Gun and Top Shot in the master course. And I'm currently a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, black belt in combatives. I'm a board member on the combatives belt system for Combatives University. And I just have a passion for teaching, helping people, and especially helping young men and men become men of agency. So that's what I do.
That's awesome, man. Having the 4th kiddo is on the way. How old are the other 3?
My oldest, he's going to be 16 next week. Then I have a daughter who's 8. She's going to be 9, or she's going to be 9 next month. And my youngest now, he's going to be 4 this year, or 5 this year. And we got a little guy, Jacob. He's on his way. He'll be here in July.
That's awesome, man. We just had our 4th a few months ago, so we got 9, 7, 4, and then 5 months old now. So it's 4 kids are awesome, man. Cool, good deal, man. Congratulations on the baby on the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in the firearms training world, and what brought you to the Defensive Combatives course with John.
Yeah, so non-LE, non-mil. I run a small on the side in addition to my normal 9 to 5. I have a training company called Templar Defense where we focus on basic firearms training. Everything after that, I bring in outside instructors where I met John. Did some training with him. Martial arts, I'm a 4-stripe purple belt under Jeff Messina in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I've got about 6 years of stand up, 4 years of that being under Mark Beecher. Kind of what got me into kind of training, a lot like John. I had my first kid and I realized that, holy crap, I've got somebody else who I'm responsible for. And so that's when I started training. And then kind of through jujitsu is how I got introduced into combatives. So
Talk to us. So I guess, John, I want to get your perspective on how combatives fit into, or where it fits in, I guess, on the continuum training. And then, there's strictly firearms, and then there's strictly, jujitsu and grappling and boxing. How would you liken combatives to that world, and how does it, I guess, interface with firearms?
Um, so I would say it's as much part of marksmanship or much part of firearms training as marksmanship is, or practical accuracy. You're and in fact, I would say that it even does things that you can't do with marksmanship. So, for instance, there's not every problem you're going to run into is going to call for a gun. Sometimes you might have to fist fight somebody. Then there's going to be times where you might have to talk somebody down who's aggressive. And in my opinion, if you're capable of physically defending yourself, as far as speaking verbally when people, when they're talking crazy to you, it's going to give you the confidence that you're going to be able to stand your ground. You're not going to stoop down to the level. The one thing that I try to portray or project on people is that now that you've decided to carry a gun, you've decided that you want to be a serious defender and you want to be one of the good guys. Well, that means you have to always be the adult in the room. You don't get to be emotionally impulsive. You don't get to be quick to anger. You don't get to curse people out who cut you off in traffic, because now you're the type of person that can point at something and make it die. I mean, if we're talking about martial arts, well, the death touch is real. It's called the trigger press. So, with that in mind, you have to be able to talk yourself down, or you have to be able to talk somebody down, be confident enough to that if things get sideways, that I can handle this because I've got an undeniable stack of proof that says I can probably take care of this situation without escalating things. And if I do, I have that ability to articulate it in a better way where, look, I did this, he did that. I told him to stop. He continued to approach me. I told him to get back. Then he swung on me. I defended myself. He went for my weapon. So I grabbed it. And that's what I did to defend myself. I don't want to say anything else. I want my lawyer. And I think it's like when you have that ability and you've been training physically, I think the verbal part gets easy.
That's a great point. I was in a justifiable use of deadly force seminar years ago, and there was a student in that class that, that student had in his mind, a legitimate fear of being the victim or becoming the victim of the knockout game, right, and being punched one time and then dying. And he asked the same question several different ways. Is like, hey, if I felt like this person was going to victimize me in that manner, right, catch me off guard, sucker punch me, at what point would I be justified in using my handgun to defend myself, right? And the thing that I took away is like, man, the problem with that, right? Like if that's a legitimate fear, unfortunately, you have to be punched before you're justified in using your handgun, right? You obviously didn't see the attack coming. So the advice that I tried to, pass along to him in one of the sidebar conversation is like, man, you need to do everything that you can to reduce that scope of fear that you have so that you're more confident in your abilities, so that every potential altercation does not become oh crap, I have to get my gun out and probably shoot this guy and use my handgun as a standoff device. I think that's a valid point. If you're confident in your capabilities, you're going to be it reduces the number of altercations that you'll likely have to introduce your handgun into it. So I want to start talking about that class. Craig, give us a little bit, talk to us a little bit about what what that class looks like. Is it a 1-day class? Is it a 2-day class? And then what are the first few hours of that class look like on the range from a student's perspective, Craig?
Yeah, so no, it was a 1-day shooting class. Usually the first, after safety brief or whatnot, John kind of talks about kind of the context and what he's showing, right? He's got this, I'll call it a web. I don't have it in front of me, but it talks about the different positions, right? Fence, the high fence, long guard, and just kind of the different positions that you can. It's almost like a fluid. What is the best way to describe it? It's
Flow chart.
Yeah. So you can be in a bunch of different positions based on what's going on. And so usually the first, that's kind of what it starts out is talking about the context. And he goes over that flow chart quite a bit.
John, what are the minimum requirements for this course as far as carry gear and prerequisites? Is there a minimum skill set that a student must have to take this course?
So the course is designed to be no prerequisite. All my classes are designed that way. It's just it's just getting you movement or getting you moving and getting you understanding. Because I think when typically if we're lucky enough to get somebody to train past their concealed carry permit requirements, there's really a lot they don't know. And what I try to do with people is paint the picture for them. Like for instance, we'll use the example of the student you talked about that he had the serious fear of being a victim of a knockout game. Well, what's required there? Like, how do you defend a sucker punch? Well, I can't defend against something I can't see. It doesn't matter if I'm allowed to carry hand grenades. So a lot of times what you're going to do is, well, I'm going to plan my routes. So it's just like taking a pragmatic approach to self-defense and not making it so complicated. And also being available. It's like, I think the idea that people have someone who has done all this stuff as a firearms instructor and on the martial arts side, I think it's kind of like they can ask these kind of different questions and they can get kind of a unique blend as far as like, okay, where do these parts intersect? All right. So where am I going to be fighting with a gun? How do I prevent that from happening? What do I do if somebody grabs me with a gun? So it's like, okay, so the course design is laid out to where like, first I'm going to show you how to shoot. I'm going to show you how to use the gun. I'm going to show you how to draw it from concealment. Then we're going to talk about shooting up close at retention. And this is it's all technical training methods. So as far as like how to develop your technique for shooting at close range. So that way you can overcome those compulsions to project the gun forward or floating the gun. And then we go into kind of clinch fighting with the gun. And first we preface that with starting as far as like, what is de-escalation and making sure that we can keep eyes on whatever it is going to attack us, making sure we're moving appropriately and keeping things from getting to a bad spot. If I can make it to where I'm a hard target, I'm hard to isolate, I'm hard to pin down, then a lot of times like this guy ain't worth the effort. I don't, I'm going to go rob somebody that's easier to rob. Okay. So, and then if things kind of if things are taken there, then we deal with that too. But ultimately the goal is to, what does winning look like? I talk about like winning there's a huge difference between winning and won. And winning for the concealed carriers, going home and living peacefully. If a guy wants to walk away cursing and saying whatever he wants to say to me, that's cool. Like I'm not worried about that. Like I already have a list of the 5 people I live with that's whose opinion matters to me. So some stranger on the sidewalk, doesn't matter what he says. And if we need to take things to where it's lethal, then I need to also make sure that force is appropriate and in response to the threat.
Hey, John, so I want to
Yep.
dig in a little bit deeper on that. So Jeremy's original question is kind of like, what's your prerequisite, right? And you said
Sure.
you don't really have one.
Mhm.
Usually when we think about retention style shooting, getting into some of that quote unquote more advanced style stuff.
Mhm.
How do you have the ability to kind of get into things like that when you have a student that's maybe brand new, that doesn't even know how to draw from a holster out of concealment yet? Do you work through all that before you can get into there, or how does that work?
Yes, yeah. So the first half of the class is of the defensive combatives is all about working from the holster. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is teach them firearm safety. Okay, how to draw, shoot the gun safely without hurting themselves, making sure that they're holstering properly, because it's typically it's a huge pet peeve of mine, but it's very typical. People, they're very slow to draw, but they're really fast to holster, and it's like, and that's the part that's gonna hurt you. Like, doing that's going to hurt you. So I try to make sure that we are doing things, moving the gun, presenting the gun safely, and holstering safely. Then that's when we can, like, all right, now we can spend the other half of the class as far as retention shooting technique. And I work through it with very step-by-step cues. I don't like to say crawl, walk, run, because it's like comparatively running looks nothing like walking or crawling. So I like to just kind of do it's like there are cues as far as coaching methods. That's very progressive. So so once we start, I show them how to draw, or first how to a garment clear. I like to call it's called the roll, where I'll just roll the garment behind the sweat guard of the holster. So that way the pistol is completely exposed. They can do that from a seated position. So as far as like using this for surreptitious draw strokes, they have that as part of their arsenal. Then also when they're doing in-fight weapon access, it's a huge, like, it's very viable position. I use it a lot. So so it's a I try to give people as few solutions as possible to as many problems as possible, with it breaking it down very basic and very step by step. So that way we can reach the terminal learning objective, to where they are drawing safely, shooting from retention safely, holstering safely, and they have the appropriate training methods, so that they know what to do as far as like when they leave the course. We have a concept called terminating training, which is people stop training at the termination of the event. So what I want for people to do is I teach them a set of drills and training methods, so that way they can continue to train. So that way, as they come back to a follow-on course, like your pistol knife combatives, or your knife combatives, or integrated or ground combatives, then they've already worked on these things. Because what I found is, if I do everything in one weekend, typically, as far as like overcoming that compulsion, they haven't really done it, because they haven't spent the time on the range working through it, or they haven't spent the time in the jujitsu gym with a blue gun working on shooting from that compression. So, or compensating for appropriate compression and extension of range. So, so that's how I approach it, to where it's like it's Barney style. Like, unless you're like really negligent, it's really hard to mess up.
That makes sense. Craig, I want to kick it back over to you. What were some of the obstacles that you had coming into that class, or some things that I guess kind of surprised you about your own abilities with the handgun in the combative setting?
Um, Shoot. Thanks for putting me on the spot, man. I appreciate that. Um, that I'm really not too sure. Uh, one of the one of the things that I appreciated from that was being able to look at it from actually having a background in martial arts, and actually understanding what John was like actively trying to teach, and it all made sense. Um, but I would say overall, some of the stuff that the students probably struggled with. I think John's right. Like on the holster work, people are slow to get out, but quick to put back. And that's what people don't understand. Like the reholster is the most dangerous time we're dealing with that gun. And something, is causing us, something has allowed us legally to get that gun out, right? And so if that's the case and they are within a close distance, I got to get that thing out quickly. And depending on how close or they are not, or how close they are to you, I can go to full extension or retention. And so kind of getting that, rewiring some of the students' brains. I think um, some of them kind of struggled with that, but it got a lot better. And then probably for me though, um, one of the things that and I know I don't mean to dodge the question, but I would say one of my takeaways from John's class is, and I know we'll probably get to this sooner, is so much like when we train handguns, right? Pistol shooting, almost everything is, like draw to first shot, and it's so quick. It's an immediate. As soon as you're drawing that gun, you're firing a shot. John kind of opened up my eyes to where, and I knew this, but it really didn't click. When you draw that gun, you don't necessarily have to press that round off, right? And so a lot of times throughout the course, if we're at further distance where I don't have to be a compress, a thumb pectoral, or even a compress, if I can extend, I might draw to a low ready, right? Because just presenting that gun might have caused that individual to stop what he's doing. And once again, legally in Texas, if the threat no longer exists, you're no longer justified in using deadly force. So that was a big thing for me. That kind of had a light bulb came off that, hey, I know we practice that draw to first shot, and I'm a proponent of being as good as you can in all aspects of everything, shooting, martial arts, whatever. But just because you get that gun out, and we need to get it out quickly at all times, but just because you get it out doesn't necessarily mean you need to fire that shot. And so that was actually one of the key takeaways that I took from that class from John that kind of really opened my eyes. So I know that didn't really answer your question, but for me, that was like a huge takeaway.
No, that's awesome, and that kind of leads off into another topic that is once again gained some traction and popularity, in the social media world, and that's jailbait splits, and that kind of feeds into this concept of if you always train to draw and shoot, at what point does that create a negative effect or a negative outcome because you haven't trained yourself to slow down and process what's actually going on around you. And it's always interesting. One of the interesting things for me is through these interviews is every third or fourth interview, we see this kind of perspective that I really like to see. And it's that, hey, just because you get your gun out and into the fight doesn't mean you're pressing a round off into the bad guy, right? It's dialing that back. So John, I want to kick it over to you in the combatives world, especially when you're working with students on, that clinch fighting. What are you seeing, or I guess, what are some of the things that you want to impart on your students with regards to making the decision as to whether or not they have to shoot? Is that a situation where if they're hands-on with somebody, how are they, or how would you like them to go through that process or that mental process during that altercation? And how are you, and it sounds like in some of your later on classes, you're probably integrating that kind of thought process into the drills that you work. But is that something that you start to see in the combatives course?
Absolutely. I mean, it's I start every course with the same thing, is that everything has to come from the standpoint of being appropriate and minimal force. And like if you go and like it's very popular on social media to watch guys like they'll jump on a bob and they'll start blasting it with something, or they'll do something crazy, kung fu the dummy, and slash his throat or something like that to make it look like they're John Wick or something. But in the real world, there are rules. I mean, it's contrary to popular belief. Like there's no rule of street fights. There are, especially if you're the good guy. It's called the law, and there's something called use of force law. So that means using things that you're justified. That means we're all falling under that Graham v. Connor standard of objective reasonableness. So those are the things that matter, right? As far as making sure that if God forbid you guys get into a situation like that the DA who's taking 6 months to deliberate over what you did in 6 seconds, he's like, yeah, you know what? That makes sense to me. And you have to also be able to articulate that to a jury of your peers who's probably some retired second grade teacher who has no idea what it is to get into a fight. Probably his family there has been a fight in his family for generations. So it's like, how do you articulate to that guy? Well, you set the stage. Well, I was here. I did this. I was trying to leave. I told this guy to get away from me. He continued to attack me. Then he brought out a screwdriver and he stabbed me with it. So I locked him up and I shot him. And then I asked him to stop, and he continued to approach me. So I shot him again, and I shot him until he stopped. And it's like, well, when you frame it that way, it makes sense. And it's like, and once he went down and once he stopped fighting me, I stopped fighting him. So, so it's like you have to be able to articulate that to someone who doesn't fight at all. And so that's kind of the idea that I try to project on my students, that it's like on the gun side, you have guys that are very, very good with use of force law. Like we are really, really good as far as using minimal force, making sure that we're justified in shooting. I think we do a great job in that. As far as like the jail time splits and all that stuff, I know we kind of rag on our own and all that, but like honestly, I've trained with a lot of people, and I think we do a really, really good job in the gun world as far as appropriate use of force. On the martial arts side, however, it's like they only talk about when things get kinetic. They never really talk about like bringing down the temperature, right? And so I think so that's really where I try to have the students do it, right? Where I put them in the training methods where they are in those situations where they have that ability to not only de-escalate but escalate as needed. And I also talk about it in terms of like that it's not a this or that, right? I mean, it may go back and forth. It may be that situation where you pop him once in the hip and he's like, "Oh, I'm done," and you got to stop. And you can't be so uh, you can't be so committed to what you're doing that you want to go ahead and finish that fight the way a fighter wants to finish that fight. I mean, remember, winning for us looks like walking away peacefully, taking as little damage as possible, using appropriate force. So, as much as I want to see people go out, compete, do MMA, go out and do USPSA and get as good as possible, I want people to do that too. But it's like every single training method, regardless of the quality, has limits. And you have to put yourselves in those situations where you got to be able to dial it back. And so I think that's why scenario training is its own thing. Like you have drills where you're trying to get that one, that second and a half build drill. You have that, draw, sub-second draw. You have those, MMA fights. Like those are all training scenarios. As far as like they assist in terms of the big picture. It's like whenever you get to that point where winning the game is becoming the end instead of the means, that's really when you have the problem.
That makes sense. We have a user comment. Any comments or context on creating distance in confrontations?
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
Run.
Yeah. So yeah, there's but even then, right? Like how long can you run? Like what's your mile and a half time, right? So it's like, you know what I'm saying? So like,
I hate you.
Yeah. So like, it's like, yeah, that's great. But like, why would you come see me? Like, why don't you go see like a running coach or some shit? So it's like creating space. It's like, it's something that is, it's something that can be done, but it's easier said than done. And there's very simple methods, but simple and easy, that's not the same thing. So that's really the main thing. Is just like, it's not something I'm gonna say, hey, just create space and walk away, because it's like, how much have you trained that? Because it's like you got somebody really committed to moving forward, and they're putting you between them and a hard place, or them and another person. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so many things that happen before things go kinetic. There's a conversation, there's a social aspect, then there's the, you can watch for pre-assault cues. There's so many things that happen before things go kinetic. It's like, so are you watching for those things? Because I think that's a lot more important than as far as like what exact technique I'm going to do for when I get into a fight. And I mean, I know it may be kind of underwhelming because they're like, oh man, I'm going to go see this guy who's a combatives black belt and a gun instructor. I'm going to go learn how to John Wick some fools. And then they go to the class, they hear from that, well, the class has to do a lot with making sure things don't get shitty. I mean, we can do that, but in terms of pragmatism, like that doesn't really have a lot of application towards practical defense.
Yeah, there's a lot of that want out there from the students, right? They want to go, teach me how to make the jailbait splits. And it's like, well, the stuff that's actually going to save your life is not very interesting or intriguing. A lot of it's common sense when you really dig into it and think about it. And you were mentioning, through that conversation about creating distance, what myths and Craig, I want to get your opinion on this too, and your thoughts on this too. What myths are you seeing in the combatives world that, I mean, in the handgun or in the handgun and the gun world, there's a ton of them, right? Like if you shoot them in your front door, drag them in, and you know, the conversations around, you know, duty grade optics, and you know, if you're carrying an SRO on your carry gun and you drop it and you break it, it's like, well, if that's the case, you're wrestling around with the dude and you don't need your freaking red dot. So what are some myths that you guys are seeing out of the combatives world? And I guess, what are the challenges that you have as an instructor to overcome some of those myths with your students?
Greg, you want to start?
I'll let me go back and talk about like the whole jailbait splits, because I've got friends on both sides of the aisle, and this is kind of where I come from that. And then once again, you know, we had talked about, you know, having to draw the gun. That is a small percentage. That is like the last option, and what you know, combatives gives us that, you know, 50 to 90%, and then before that, you know, we've got our ability to talk ourselves out of a situation, or don't even you know, make yourself a hard target to where they don't even try to mess with you. But the way that I kind of see it is in both shooting and combatives training, jujitsu or whatnot. If you like, once again, I'm always an advocate of trying to become the best that you can be. But if you are never pushed, you really don't know what is capable. And so if you don't know really where your performance peak is, you don't really have, you know, you're not sure what you're capable of. And then going back to the other side, you know, we know that, you know, the decision time for the brain is like 0.25 seconds. And so I think, you know, putting this in perspective, you know, I'm looking at KR Training, John Dobbs' book, and I have it. It's kind of funny. I have it earmarked. You know, people talk about falling to faulting to your level of training. Well, there's a thing in here where Paul Ford talks about, you know, and I think, quote unquote, on your darkest day, you're going to perform to 70% of your worst day. So I want my worst day to be as good as I can. So that way, when the time comes, if I have whatever I have to deploy, whether if it's hands-on or shooting, I've got the ability to do that. So once again, it's you know, and that's kind of the same thing with like jujitsu competitions. Is once that adrenaline pumps, man, you just default to like what you do every day on the mats. Like you don't even think about it. So that's kind of where like I said, I see both sides of that aisle, and I want people to push to be the best that they can. But then again, you got to understand, you know, I think if people have trained enough, when the time comes, like they'll know, like they'll know what needs to be done, you know, with the appropriate use of force within that situation to make that happen. So
I want to follow up on jail, and what I mean when I say jailbait slips isn't like you're shooting
0.17 splits and below.
Yeah, not that you're shooting so fast you're going to go to jail, but it's, you know, those splits are under 18, right? Like under 0.18. And you know, I thought maybe I need to clarify that. And so when you're hitting splits, I'm sure with you guys, you know, I'm sure we're all on the same page with it. But for our listeners, jailbait splits are sub 18 splits. If you're a grown man and they're under 18, that's jailbait. And yeah, like you said, if you're shooting at the performance where you're sub 18, you know, 0.18 on your splits, you're doing the work, you're putting the work in. And that allows you to process the other things that you have to process in a timely manner. So John, I want to kick it back over to you. Let's talk about some of those myths that you see in the combatives and your thoughts on jailbait splits.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I don't think that many people can really do that, you know. Like honestly, like, you know, I shoot USPSA, like I shoot a match almost every weekend, man. And I'm trying hard out there, and I'm getting consistently like in the twos, you know, in the low 0.2 of a second. So I don't think that many people could do that, to be honest. So, but yeah. So as far as myths go, though, I think it's funny. Like people will avoid grappling, like, oh, you know, that shit's gay. But then they'll go on and say like, oh, you know, if you get into a grapple, you know, bite him, pull his hair, grab his nuts or something like that, whisper in his ear. But that grappling stuff super gay. So I think that stuff is hilarious to me. And it's like, you know, it's just grappling is just a part of the fight. I mean, there's depictions in it as old as warfare itself, where you have one warrior holding down another guy from the opposition team, and his friend is coming with something sharp to shove in his body. And so I think grappling is an essential component of it. But it's like when you tell that to people, they default to like something where they see MMA and jiu-jitsu, where they see the guys rolling on the ground. And you can also use grappling in reverse. You can use that to make sure that you are able to keep the fight from going down. Make sure that you keep your balance, because now you have an awareness as far as like body position, posture, and base. So that way it's harder for you to slip. It's harder for you to take those falls. And it's interesting, like all fights will fall into two basic categories, which is help is on the way or help is not on the way. And just because it's not on the way for you doesn't mean it's not on the way for them. So it may be a good plan for you to take someone down and hold them, or pin them against the wall and hold them. It may also be a good plan for you to make sure you break the clinch and you rock them once or twice and beat feet out. So that's kind of a big myth. It's like that you don't need grappling. It's like, yeah, you definitely do. It's a large part of the way real fights go. A large part.
It's one of those old funny jokes that you hear, and it's premised right away. Don't care if you're gay or not. As Jedi says, it's America, do what you want, right? But it's that old joke of like, well, if grappling's gay, right? What if you get into a fight with a gay dude? Shouldn't you want to know how to get away from him?
Right?
Just saying.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, I just had a comment on that. It's just kind of funny. This podcast is a lot of innuendos. I'm just sitting here kind of watching as almost just like a spectator, just cracking up with jailbait splits and talking about gay grappling. And it's fun. So I want to get back.
As long as it's in a gi, it's not gay.
There you go. What if the gay is only down to your waist, though? Does that change?
Man, that's a moral dilemma right there. That's a real conundrum, a quandary.
Yeah. So let me get back to the class. We kind of got way offside on that stuff. But what does your course look like as far as gear? How many rounds do you need? And do you have any kind of specific drills that you like to run?
So as far as gear, it's a standard, you need a quality belt or something like a concealment chassis, i.e. your Enigma, something that's going to be able to withstand, holstering over repeatedly. You're going to need a semi-automatic firearm. I'd say semi, not because I discriminate against revolvers. It's just, they're just suboptimal. Sorry, guys. I know there's some wheel gun lovers out there. If you run that, that's your thing, and you love it. Cool. If you like it, I love it. But I just think it's just like, as far as the round count goes and all that, it's just gonna require a lot of time for them to continue to reload and whatnot. So semi-automatic, and a quality holster. That's pretty much it. And the round count is exactly 400 rounds.
Nice. And we've kind of talked about drills as far as like retention and drawing from holsters, stuff like that. And more specifically, there's so many drills out there. As you know, we're sponsored by RangeBuddy. Jeremy created a great app. There's tons of drills on his app. What are some of those drills that you use in part of your course that kind of help your students along?
I'm not really going through drills per se. I'm like kind of like your build drill or something like that. I'll kind of have people. I want to make sure that people can hit what they aim at, right? Because again, this is kind of geared towards like your guy or gal who just came out of concealed carry. So I just introduced them to what's possible, things they need to know that is important as far as a concealed carry. Like Craig mentioned earlier, drawing to a low ready. A lot of times that'll solve a lot of your problems, and it also mitigates you getting those aggravated assault charges. You'll see guys, they'll work on compression and they'll do something like this where they point the muzzle at whoever it is that they're doing. Oh, like if you do this and you muzzle 5 or 6 people, that's 5 or 6 charges.
Aggravated assault.
So those are the things I really try to push on people. Just as far as like a technique but I don't really get the context until we get to the follow-on courses. The most we'll do is a draw to like a 3-shot string. That's pretty much it as far as like going from concealment, and then we get into the retention stuff. But I mean, like always though, I mean, if I want to see people get out and compete, I want them to get at the highest skill level possible. But it's just my class is not dedicated for those folks. I mean, I may come out with another class later on the line that is a higher skill level base, but for now it's like there's just so many new gun owners out there, and they kind of just need to know how to deal with a confrontation while armed. That's kind of what I focus on.
Nice.
There is, I
So
was going to say, there actually is, and it's kind of, it's being popularized right now. And John in the class, he really, he doesn't really call it this, but I know right now the retreating bill drill is very popular. But one of the things that John goes over in the class is, you're within contact distance, you've got your cover, thumb, pectoral, and then as you break contact, and as you move away from the target, your gun extension changes in proximity to how close you are to them, up into the point to where, okay, now I'm putting up my sights and whatnot. So for those that see the retreating bill drill and a little bit sexiness, he actually kind of dissects that and really breaks it down into what it actually might look like in a real confrontation. So that's one of the things I can remember from that.
in the beginning, before we started, I asked, is this a shooting course or is this a hand-to-hand course, right? And right away it was like, it's a shooting course. That's one thing I asked Craig while you were getting ready there, John. And to me, tell me, Craig, if I'm wrong, this is almost not even a shooting course. It's more of a logistical thinking course about what you should and should not be able to know as you can shoot a gun. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So John does a real good job. Really at the beginning of, and he talked about this, we can, as civilians, we can only respond with the same level of force that we perceive as being used against us. And so he talks about, okay, well, what is the appropriate response for what they're doing? So if they step it all the way up to the top, then I can respond with that. But if they start to step it back down, then you have to respect that and whatnot. But yeah, and like I said, coming from it, taking that class from a martial arts background, it's it all, people talk about like combatives as a martial art, and it's just a combination of like grappling, and it's a combination of stand up, and it's a combination of shooting. And so if you can do all those three and find a way to put them together, it just makes sense. Like I remember one of the things, one of the guard positions, John goes over, after you cover and whatnot, is in Muay Thai we call it the long guard. And John was showing that, and I was like, holy crap, man, that's just a long guard. That's all it is. And so I think for those that have a martial arts background, it's just epiphany moments left and right. And I think they can understand the context a lot more and really understand why we do certain things. But no, it is very much so a thinking man's class. It's not so much if a logic if then. It gives you options, but no, it really makes you think. It really, really does.
Yeah, I really like the thought process, because we've been to a ton of training courses, right? And it's basically you're going to the course, you hear the beep, you hear the scream threat, you draw, you shoot 2, you shoot 5, you shoot whatever it is. But there does need to be a lot of this thinking and thought process of being able to understand that every time you draw your gun isn't a shoot. Jeremy and I, we've taken some force on force classes, and what happens in force on force class 99% of the time at the beginning, everybody draws their gun, everybody gets shot, whether it's a shooting stage or whether it's not, right? Because everybody wants to shoot. It's the funnest part. Plus you get to shoot your buddy usually. But when you put it into the serious context of force on force, we've got to understand that these shooting a gun at somebody, right? It's a big deal, obviously, right? You see them all more commonsensical, But the reality is I don't think we even think enough about all the other things. We talk about, have good situation awareness. Okay, what does that look like? Right? Well, that's going to depend on the situation. How do we talk somebody down? Using the stance methods that you're talking about, John, the things that I'm not familiar with the martial arts things, of being able to use your hands and your feet and your legs and all that stuff to be able to create some distance, I think is a good benefit to even new students. And I really enjoy that thought process, that's what you guys do. So, or you do, John. So you were going to kind of say something, I think, and wanted to jump in. I want you to kind of just finish my thought.
Oh yeah, that the whole screaming threat and all that shit is gay. But
Yep.
I'm just teasing you guys. I'm just teasing.
No, that is awesome, right? It's the it's like 2 shades less gay than the scan and assess, where you just whip your hair whip your head back and forth, right? It's, what are you doing? What are you doing? You saw nothing, you assessed nothing, and then you do the little tactical turnaround. That's cool, man. That's cute. If you do that in class, though, as an instructor, if we have our students do that, I think we are able to raise our prices by like 200%.
Just because people going, man.
Yeah. It's for me as an instructor and a student, somebody who looks out in the world, and then we, for a long time, or even now for me, right, it's, we took a class a couple of years ago, and for me, it's like, man, I don't want to train with an instructor that doesn't have standards, because I want them to be able to, if they don't have standards, and how do you know if you got better? And I've been on this kick where it's like, accuracy standards, and I need to be pushing my accuracy standards at distance and all this other stuff. And almost to the point where I've neglected, or where I am neglecting the most probable case, right? And that's because, I've had this kind of disdain and distaste in my mouth for the 3 yards, the 3 rounds, 3 yards in 3 seconds, where I've gone to the opposite side of it. And, kind of through this conversation, it's like, well, hold on a second. The 3 rounds at 3 yards in 3 seconds, that's okay. I can rationalize how that's not I need to be better with my gun, because if I'm good enough at 25 with my gun, I'm going to be good enough at 25. But what about the fight at 3 yards that I've kind of missed, right? And that's the combatives part of it. Because if I'm shooting somebody at 3 yards, that's arm's length, right? And it kind of really opens up this world, this training world, that I think needs to be talked about a little bit more. And I think the reason the gun world, right, the firearms training industry kind of turns a shoulder to it, is because we don't know how the heck to teach it. We definitely don't like rolling around with a bunch of dudes getting beat up, right? It's one of these things where we just kind of, I don't need to worry about the 3 yard stuff, because I'm great at 25.
Yeah.
And what do you have? I guess what's some advice that you have for me to kind of overcome that and get me to start prioritizing that most probable scenario that isn't a gun situation, right? It's the combative side of it.
First is find somebody who is going to do it in a very reasonable, practical manner. And you could, you've been in training self-defense long enough to where you could sniff out somebody who's doing some silly bullshit and just like, yeah, that shit'll get me thrown in jail forever. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, if I make the dude bleed out, but I go to jail for life, like, that's not a win, bro. So I think you guys you'll be able to sniff that out from just your firearms. As far as that knowledge, don't forget that, apply that. Right? Is like, this guy doing something appropriate. Does his social media reflect something that is like, I want something a prosecutor to use on a disposition of me? Like, if I see this guy murdering this dummy every other social media post, and it's like, it's cool for the gram, and hey, God bless you if you're getting followers and all that. But it's like, I don't want your feed as far to my disposition, as far as when I'm getting prosecuted. I don't want that. The other thing is like, is the guy getting better? That's like kind of like you spoke about standards for instructor. My standard is, as an instructor, is transparency and continue to improve. making sure that I'm not only training within my own social group or my own thought group or an echo chamber. I mean, my friends are my kids. So as far as like who I train with, like those are all like new guys. I get into USPSA because that, that I know a lot of instructors don't do that because, practice score is scary. So to answer your question, I think you can see who is full of shit really easily. I think when they're trying to sell you some BS as far as like you can do this with the one move, as far as like people who are taking you through a process, I think that's a very, very different thing. People who are taking you through a reasonable, logical process is low threshold, right? Because it's like if I take anybody to a course, like if we were just doing shooting, and there's like, hey, this is my first shooting course. Oh, okay, cool. We're gonna go ahead and go to Ben Stager's class today, or Tim Herron's class today. Like that would not be inappropriate, and that's the equivalent of what a lot of combatives guys are doing. I'm trying to give somebody or give a class that bridges the gap between guys who are only in the mat room or only on the range. And like, oh, okay, so this is how these things intersect, right? They're not necessarily apart. It's just kind of like people will it's reasonable. People typically stick with the things they're good at, and that's fine, But it's like, okay, but it doesn't remove the responsibility that you need to learn these things. But let's go about it in a reasonable way. Let's go about it like, all right, let's start with the techniques without context, without force, okay? Without anybody pressing you or anything like that. How do I do this at this range? Okay, that's when we talk about, the thumb pectoral index created by Craig Douglas. Then once we get into there, now let's talk about before things get shitty on the initial approach. Okay, how do I know the person I'm going to deal with? How do I know they're going to attack me? And then we start using like a lot of like managing unknown contacts, which comes from Craig Douglas as well. Craig has been a huge mentor for me. And so I pay a lot of attribution to him, and and a lot of respect, homage to him as far as that part of the course. And then we start getting into, all right, so this is now typically if somebody swings at you, how do you defend that? Right? You're going to at least be in a position where the social aspect, you put yourself in a position where you can see a punch coming. Okay. Now that you see it coming, this is how you defend it. Okay. Now this is what you got to do. You get a clinch so that way they can't hit you anymore. They can't take any damage. Okay. And now you're in a position where you have that proprioception where you can feel if they're trying to access a weapon. Right. And now it's like, okay, now through all of that process, it's like, all right, so now Jeremy, articulate, why did you do what you did? Oh, well, I went through this. I felt them going for a weapon. So I locked them up. I pinned them down. I felt him give up. So I kind of got up and make sure I drew to a little ready. He kept his hands up and I walked away, or something to that effect, just for the drill, right? For the sake of the drill. We can't like simulate the police coming in, everything like that. But with that in mind, it's like that's low bar enough to where like somebody with zero ability, zero physical fitness, zero physical skills can come in and at least understand what's going on, and they can take it with them and continue to apply it after the course. It's like the best review for me isn't like 5-star on Google. The best review for me is that, hey, let me go get the other gun guys and train on some of the drills that I learned in this class. If you continue to train after training with me, that's like the absolute biggest compliment to me, right? If you say nothing but do that, I will be like, God bless you for that, because that is like the best thing for me.
Jeremy was he's been looking for a while to figure out how he can get to Detroit Urban Survival Tactics class, and I think yours is a great gateway to get him started. So
I'll be a star,
Jeremy,
if I go to that class.
I think that was a great answer for him, because I think he was saying, asking for a friend, how could I get to Dust? And I think you answered it pretty well. So
I was gonna come off mute and say canceling my registration for the Dust course.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Good job saying that with a straight face, man.
Yeah. I want to do a freaking jerk. I wanted to use that to transition into, right. So, that little bit of conversation there for me, it's like, man, it sounds like this class does a great job of laying the foundational thought process for folks as they continue in their, their jiu-jitsu, their BJJ training, and their handgun training, their firearms training. And Craig, I wanted to kind of kick it back over to you to get your opinion and your thoughts on how training with John has changed or improved or whatever it is for your thought process as you're rolling on the mats.
Yeah, no. This kind of goes back to like certain myths, and we kind of have this in the jujitsu community, like sport jujitsu versus combatives jujitsu. There's after talking with John, and I was lucky to where actually I got to hang out with him for the entire weekend, and he had kind of showed me some stuff, and so now when I roll, every class, one of the main things that I think of is how can I separate my opponent's hands from his tool belt? Like, how do I keep him from his hands from his waist, so accessing his tools? And then also, if they can't use their hands, right, either through tying them up or I'm too close, either with the the underhook and the bicep tie. And what people don't understand is that the whole underhook and bicep tie. I mean, that's just that's hand guard, the side control. That's what my jujitsu game is, and so I try to incorporate a lot of those things when I roll. So a lot of pressure, a lot of separating hands from waist, making sure that they can't use their hands. Isolating hands. A lot of things that I like to do as well, and this is a little bit more intricate, but John, you'll understand, is like going to a reverse case of gatami and patting down your opponent for weapons before you go to mount. So understanding that, kind of what John teaches in that combatives, I try to take that to the jujitsu mats, because I know, God forbid, if I ever have to do that in the streets, that's what I'm going to default to. And so if that's what I've been training, that's what's going to happen. So yeah, it's not sexy, but it's smash, it's control. That's kind of what I've been doing. So it's made a big difference in how I roll with my partners.
To segue into that, how do you use what you've learned from John onto the new students that you teach there at Templar Defense?
So one of the things I'd tell them, and this is just, it's, that the handgun is just one thing. And John had talked about in his class, he's correct. The class bridges the gap between, if you're a shooter, but you've never taken any, martial arts training, jujitsu, Muay Thai or whatnot, it kind of opens your eyes to the other side, and vice versa. Like if you're a jujitsu guy and you're just now being introduced to the firearm side, it opens up your eyes to the other side. And so that's kind of one of the things that I tell my students is, and we talked about this before, the gun is a small part. And having that skill set, of combatives or ground fighting, whatever, that gives you that ability to basically modulate what level of force you are allowed to use. And so there's more. One of the things I try to teach my students, like, guys, this is a lifestyle. And there's so much more to it than just shooting, right? And that's one of the main issues I think most gun owners have, is they think the gun's a lucky talisman that wards off evil spirits, and it's either nothing or it's the gun. And no, there is so much more in between that I wish people would understand and grasp. And that's kind of like John's trying to get people to understand that. Whether you're gun side or martial arts side, it all goes together. And he's trying to get people to understand. It's like, guys, there's more to it than just one or the other. Like, it fits together.
I love it. Yeah. For the longest time, I want to carry pepper spray, right? I was like, I don't need pepper spray. It's silly. A, it doesn't work. B, it's, you know what I mean? What's the use case for it? And then, I had a couple instances where I had the potential to get into a violent confrontation with a homeless person in my day job was became very evident. And I was like, man, I do not want to go hands on with this homeless dude. Because if you lose a fight to a homeless guy, you become homeless. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but that is what happens.
We don't make the rules.
Yeah, exactly. We don't make the rules. It's just, that's what it is. You lose a fight to a homeless person, you become homeless. Right. But then it's like, so I got the pepper spray, and I had this deal where I told the guy, I was like, hey man, if you don't turn around and walk away from me, I'm going to pepper spray you. And the only coherent thing that this dude had said to me in the multiple times I've interacted with him, he turned away and he said, man, don't pepper spray me. And it just, in the most defeated tone, and he turned around and he walked away from me. And I'm like, man, that's almost as universal as getting a handgun pointed at you. And then through this conversation that we've had today, it's like, man, I'm deficient in the hand-to-hand stuff. And there's a big reluctance on my part, because it's, I know if you look at, it's 10 years to become 10 years of hard, sustained work to become a black belt in just about any reputable martial art. And I'm like, man, that's just too much damn work for me. And I reconcile that well with, you don't have to be a black belt to be in the top 1% of dudes that are capable of defending themselves without going hands on. So where should somebody like that start, that understands, that recognizes the need for hand to hand to be able to defend themselves without integrating or without bringing a gun into the fight, unless you absolutely have to? Is it jujitsu? Is it Krav Maga? Is that that's
yeah?
So I John, before, I'm gonna let John answer this. I did Krav Maga before I trained jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. And I will tell you this, there is a reason why UFC MMA is based on grappling, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and boxing.
Yeah.
So, John.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as far as everyone has limited time and money. You guys are real adults with real adult jobs, and you guys need something that is going to give you a lot of ROI, right? Or a lot of return on your investment. So I think in terms of that, I think jujitsu, especially if you are going to the right gym, right? And jujitsu doesn't have there's no universal standard for practice, but every gym has its own kind of culture to it. If you see a lot of dudes there, a lot of kids, typically it's a pretty good school. Especially if it's a lot of kids, the place is going to be open in 5 years because they have a kids program, a successful one. So I would start there, and you got to think about it. It's like, if you got to go at least twice a week to retain information, you want to like the people there too. So it's like you want to make sure, because it's going to be like a part of your social life now. So you want to do that. You want to start with, I always kind of work my way out, kind of the concentric circle model, where it's like you want to start with whatever's closest to you. And if the culture isn't right for you, or if you see a lot of young dudes tuned up, and if you're a grown man, and you just want to learn and enjoy yourself, probably not the place. Right? You can also, if you hey man, this guy has the credentials I'm looking for, you could also do private lessons with a guy. So that's also a very, very good option, especially for folks who have limitations. I know a guy, one of my clients, and a guy named Frank, he had his total shoulder replaced. He's a 70-year-old former Navy SEAL. So it's like, dude, don't go to live classes. Go hire this dude, see what you can get for 2 or 3 times a month or something like that, and just kind of move a little bit, under low threshold. So you could do something. I mean, you got paraplegics that are out there climbing mountains. So it's like you could work a way around your limitations. It's just, you just have to be smart about it. But I think jujitsu, I think that gives you the best bang for your buck. I think it's like, you go in there and you do an intro class, and you at least have what I like to call a battle plan, as far as how to win a fight. You're a significantly better fighter, because imagine, one thing we like to call in the combatives world is a universal fight plan, which is pretty much, it's the same fight plan my 6-year-old has, and as most grown men have, which is basically bludgeon the opponent with their fists until they can no longer fight back effectively, right? Just kind of just wild throwing. And then jiu-jitsu teaches you to like, well, clinch, put them down, get a dominant position and finish the fight. So just that, because you can do that against, and it works against almost everybody you'll fight, you'll be able to beat up most people you know. So I think as far as like a ROI, you get it right away from the first class. And if you do jiu-jitsu consistently for about 6 months, you'll be among the toughest dudes like that live in America, truthfully. And if there's no jiu-jitsu around, you live in a small town, go find the high school wrestling coach. That dude is probably the toughest dude in that town, 100%. You just tell him like, hey, what do I do? How do you use wrestling if someone's punching you? And he'll just show you some crazy wrestling shit and show you how to create soul crushing pressure on people. If not, I mean, we're all walking on an omnipresent impact weapon. So he'll at least show you how to dump somebody on their head real quick. So that's kind of like the way, because grappling is kind of the first thing that happens, right? Like there's a confrontation, something happens, there's an exchange. There's a reason why you guys didn't shoot each other. So like then you guys start fighting, right? So there's strikes and there's grappling, and then there's kind of like weapons kind of get introduced in the middle of that. So that's why that's why I'm telling people start with the grappling, because it's like you're typically gonna go for control, then you're gonna defend, protect the weapon, and then that's when you do damage. And that's kind of like the 3-step process I like to use.
That's good stuff, man. That's reassuring for me as well. And I don't know if I've talked with Andy about getting into jiu-jitsu or not, but it is definitely that something that's been on my mind. I need to get my kiddos into it as well. Just
and the one thing John didn't even talk about is the physical health, the mental health aspect of it.
Oh, yeah.
And you talk about being surrounded by a group of people with the same drive and ambition, and just people that make you better. You won't find a better group of people than a jiu-jitsu gym. It's amazing. It will literally change your life.
Yeah. It's not physically demanding. I mean, it's a physical sport. It's very intense. Totally true. But what keeps people around isn't the physical demand. It's the emotional demand, because you have to be able to like be okay with like, man, I didn't do so good. Or, you know what I mean? It's like you have to deal with losing, right, on a regular basis, and reframing. You have to really work on your mindset to be able to reframe very well. It's just like, okay, this guy tapped me. Why? And you have to be able to like dissect that the same way you would with a shooting course or with your shooting training. It's just like, man, I was really slow on the draw here. Why? You know what I mean? I came here. Why? I hit that no shoot instead of that. Why? And like, if you can take that same approach and apply it to jujitsu, I mean, you'll have a great time every single time. Even if like some dude you never met, like, look, I'm a black belt. I've been training 15 years now, and there's some guy who lives in the jungle who could show up today and make me look like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And there's levels to this as there is to everything else. And you just the way we were joking around, like, we don't take ourselves that serious. Like, if I could beat up the guy I was 5 years ago today, then I'm good with that.
Nice. I like it. Are there any questions that we didn't ask that we should have asked? Is there any information that you would like to talk about before we jump up, before we give you the rest of your night back and kind of wrap this thing up?
Nah, man, that's pretty much it. Craig, you got anything?
No, not that I can think of. Like I said, the handgun combatives. It kind of opens up. It's a different perspective than what a lot of people are used to. So it actually makes you think, like, why am I doing this? What's causing me to have to draw my gun? And
yep.
I drew my gun. Okay, well, that threat's gone. So
I do have one thing too, right? I don't want other firearms guys to kind of take this, like, what I'm doing as like a threat or a slight against them. I don't know why that's a thing, but I want it to be like, look, it's like, I want to fill a gap that you may not have. That's it. That's all I'm trying to do. This isn't, it's not revolution, it's evolution, right? It's like, we've got now 30 years of UFC, and jiu-jitsu is blowing up. It's the fastest growing martial art in the world. So people kind of like, they have these questions. And so it's like, that's why it's like, all right, I better go do USPSA. I better go through a instructor development and really take the firearms side seriously. So I did that out of respect for everybody in the firearms world, because like I wouldn't be able to do this at all if it wasn't for them. So I everybody who's been doing concealed carry and everything since founding a gun site in 1976, like, man, I owe you everything, man. I don't have to suffer employment. I get to go out and hang out on the weekends with really cool people that really want to get better, care about their families, the Americans that are worth dying for. So this is not revolution, it's evolution. That's it. It's just answering another question that people have. So
yeah, and I think it's one of those, it's there are so many different components of self-defense, and then within self-defense, the firearm side of self-defense, right? And it's one of those things where um, I doubt that any reputable instructor would feel like you're stepping on their toes, because they recognize the value of it, and they also recognize the difficulty it is, or the level of commitment that it would take to get to the level where you're able to actually coach that part of it, right? And it's not one of those things where I could see where a whole bunch of like concealed carry dudes, like that's all they do. They got the NRA certificate or their certificate. They're like, you don't need to do that stuff. And they're also the same guys that are like, 3 rounds, 3 yards, 3 seconds, because they don't know how to teach people how to use their sights, where they're getting their feelings stepped on.
Yelling threat.
Yelling threat, and then they're on the line. Oh, well, you still hit them. You still hurt them. That's good enough. You got a D zone hit on that big old target over there. That's good enough. High fives. And it's like, no, man, you're teaching somebody a skill that they might have to one day rely on to save their life or the life of a loved one. How dare you allow them to have confidence in their mediocrity, or in their actual inability to do the thing that they hired you to do? For me, that's the frustrating part as an instructor, and I hate to see it. Andy and I were on a line before, and we heard an AI tell us a female student that, and it was like the biggest cringe ever, because it's like, here this woman is paid a good bit of money for you to make them better, and you're telling her that an edge shot at 10 yards was good enough. And it's like, it's not good enough, man. You have to do better. And for myself as an instructor, it's one of those things where I've committed a lot of energy and effort into being good, being fast, being pretty, decently good at distance, and decently quick at distance. Meanwhile, completely ignoring the fact that, few gunfights start off at 25 yards. And most of them start in there where the dude could reach across the room and punch you in the face. And then that's an entirely different problem. So I definitely appreciate you opening up, sharing the conversation with us tonight, and reopening my eyes to that, and lighting a little bit of a fire in me to start taking that part of my training seriously.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on, man. It's always fun talking with like-minded folks. So I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Do you teach in Alamogordo, or do you home base out of there and then travel and teach?
I've taught like one class out of here. It's I'm not a big brand, so it's like the people who know me, they'll bring me in, like guys like Craig or Nick Delgadillo. I haven't really ran training. I came up to Rio Rancho once, so that's cool, and I'm gonna be up there again this year in October doing a 2-day.
Yeah, it's one of the even dudes with huge brands, those classes don't fill in Albuquerque, man. It's one of these, and it sucks because there are a whole bunch of dudes that we want to train with, and it's like, we'd love to host you, the class just won't fill. Craig Douglas used to teach out here. I've heard, I don't know what's going on with him and the Shiv works out here. But he wasn't here last year. But other than that, it's hard to get dudes in Albuquerque for whatever reason to actually sign up and train. So in October in Rio Rancho, though, definitely sounds like that's a class that Andy and I can make it out to. Any parting advice that you have for our listeners before we get off of here, Craig?
Or
you know what? Hey, parting advice or another instructor that you recommend your students train with. The only caveat is it can't be John, and John, you can't recommend Craig. Those are just
Okay.
a given. So and another instructor that you recommend students train with.
Yeah, bit of advice, guys. If you are a gun owner, it is like it is your responsibility to train with that thing. It is like, I don't care if your daddy taught you to shoot. It is your responsibility to be as good as you can with that firearm. That's if there's one message I could pass to the gun community, guys, you need to train, need to get as good as you can with that. If there's one guy that I would have y'all go take a look at, a good friend of mine, he is an AI for Scott Jedlinski, Hunter Freeland. So make sure you guys go check him out. I think he's an instructor with Green Ops as well, that with John. But Hunter has, like John, Hunter's been a good friend, has helped me a lot with my shooting. One of the best shooters I have ever met. So Hunter Freeland, go check him out.
Awesome. John, same question over to you. Advice and somebody students should train with.
Yeah, like I said, guys, it's a lifestyle. It doesn't have to be your life. You don't have to go out and make every day is a rolling, shooting, fighting kind of thing. It's just you do a little bit, a lot. You have a consistent, just consistency will take you a long way. You don't want to peak out as fast as possible. You want to spread the base. You want to have all your base skills as solid as possible. That's really what you need. And if you can't really, if you don't have a lot of time to go out and do jiu-jitsu and hit the range, then get invested in your fitness. All right. For like fighting and shooting is real sexy, and I love to teach it. But man, the top 10 killers aren't homicide. Okay. It's mostly health related stuff. So if there's one piece of advice, get serious about your physical health. And as far as trainers, who I mean, of course, I think you should go see Craig Douglas. I think even if not just as a student, but also as an instructor, that's like the guy you need to see. I think even from the standpoint of just listening to the way he presents material and the way he speaks, no wasted words or anything like that, no fillers and anything like that. Like it's really a masterfully put together class and course. And it's like, if you can go to ECQC, it's just a huge, just a different energy. And you'll get to see as well, like it's an honest experience as far as like what you like, the way you're going to perform when all the things are together and you just show up with what you got on the table. It's an honest experience. So I highly recommend that course and that instructor.
Awesome. Andy, over to you.
This was a great night. I really appreciate both of you guys coming on, John and Craig. You gave some great insight to a lot of things that I don't think we talk about usually on podcasts. So I think it was really, really good, and I appreciate that. John, where can we find you?
You can find, I'm pretty easy to find. You look up John Valentine Combatives, and pretty much that'll be me. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So typically under like @JohnV_actual. And yeah, that's pretty easy to find. And yeah, hope to see you guys on the range of the Mats rooms. Very
cool. Craig, where can we find you out there in Houston?
Yeah, just websites, TemplarDefense.com. We got an Instagram. You can Google my name or use my name, Craig Summers. My YouTube channel will come up. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, I appreciate you guys having or joining us this evening. It was a great conversation. Like Andy said, I don't think it's a conversation that we have on the podcast very often. So it was great insight to bring our listeners, and we definitely look forward to hopefully having you guys both back on. Craig, would love to have you on as an instructor with one of your students. John would definitely like to get you back on to talk about some of those other courses. And then I'm going to head over to your website once we get off of this and look at that October class. And that'd be cool to maybe be able to take a class with Andy and you this year.
Killer.
Awesome. Remember, it's your life. It's your safety and protection. It's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next time.